Hey guys, welcome to the new year with Drop Dice. In celebration of the OSG's dubbed Year of Sci-Fi, what I wanted to do was a no excuses video on one of my favorite rules light mecha sci-fi kind of inspired game. It's called Remnants. So let's kind of get right into this. Now this one's going to be a short, sweet, to the point video, so bear with me here. If you have further questions, you can ask them inside the comments, but I wanted to do a short, maybe 10-minute video because I really lack those, and I think that's a skill I need to work on. So for Remnants, the idea behind the whole game is it is a D6 game. So basically, with one D6, you can decide how everything rolls out. And the mechanics of this goes, for example, for a skill check is going to be, and everything is done through skill checks, it's going to be a D6 plus the skill plus the stat plus modifier versus a difficulty number. So 2 is routine all the way to 14, which is epic, and it goes in 2-digit increments from there. You can figure out the chart from there. And then there's some different modifiers in there, like if it's an unskilled check, you add 2 to your difficulty. The game also comes with a rule inside there that I love using for all other games, not because I've got it from this game, but because it just is something cool and I like it. It's called the Rule of Awesome. It's specifically outlined inside the rule book, and you get a +1 or higher, depending on how many points your GM wants to give you, towards your roll, and you get 1 point of reserve. Reserve is kind of like hero points. You can use it to augment things while you are playing through. But then you get possible bonus experience for the associated skill. And then you cannot exceed +3 Rule of Awesome points. Now, the point of reserve is something that you can use, like I said, as kind of like a hero point. So essentially, say that you've got a skill that you really want to succeed on, and you're like, okay, I'm going to burn 2 reserve to give myself a +2, and I'm going to go ahead and roll my skill plus my stat here, and I got a 12. All right, awesome. I accomplished a nearly impossible task. There's also environmental damage, because with mechas, that's sort of a thing that kind of goes on. And if you look into the world, it kind of reminds me a lot of Numenera. Basically, it's a world that is on the brink of falling apart and kind of rebuilding itself. It's collapsed into an apocalyptic event, which the book never really describes, and I really like that because it leaves it up to the GM. And the world is kind of rebuilding, and there are these remnants, these mechas that are left behind, and technology that's not quite understood by people and is being used for other things. You get the idea that there was possibly a great war at one point, because these machines are kind of weird, sentient creatures almost. The cool thing is when you bond with a remnant, the mecha suit itself, it actually, instead of just being a single form, as you gain levels and progression, your mech becomes more powerful. Every time your mech is knocked down, so long as it's not fully destroyed, your mech becomes more durable, more strong. You can invest in your mech and make it better as far as like how it assaults things. And the way that I played it in my game is I made it like a symbiotic relationship. So like as the players grew, the mechs advanced and changed, and it was like this biomechanoid thing, and it was very cool. We really enjoyed it. To give you an idea, combat is basically like normal. You do an initiative check, you do your attacks, damage, and resistances, and then your health and penalties. And there's a cool mechanic in there to basically allow you to roll higher and do better odds of doing different things. So normally in an RPG, a critical would guarantee you extra success. What they do instead is what's called lead. So let's say my target number is 6, I got a 14, my lead is 8, and then it's going to be, let's say, 2 plus lead is what my damage is. So 8 plus 2, I'm doing 10 damage. That gives you a quick rundown of how that works. There's a bunch of combat modifiers. This game is mainly about combat. However, I did turn it into a pretty RP heavy game. Because we had a character who was a blind princess from another land, and the only way she could see was inside this mecha that had this advanced sonar system. Definitely really cool, because none of that's actually in the book. It was all for my players' imaginations, because it's such a rules-light system. It really encourages you to come up with ways to explain how this stuff works. So armored combat works very similar to unarmored combat, but there's little minor differences. There's melee and ranged attacks for unarmored combat, and then when you get in armored, there's assault, which is melee, and strike, which is ranged. Again, they're not defined. So if you wanted your assault to be a giant sword, while somebody else's assault is them punching or kicking or doing an axe attack or having this flame saber, beam knife, whatever you want it to be, that's your assault. Strike could be a pod of missiles, rays of lasers, chest beams, all sorts of things like that. Motion is used for defense, and we modified our games a little bit to add a little bit of speed inside there, because their speed mechanic for the Remnants the original system doesn't really do anything inside game because you get a number of moves that are kind of arbitrarily done. You basically are unlimited on your turn, with the exception of what the DM tells you, but for every action that you pile in, you get negatives on your rolls once you've decided that your turn is over and you're going to roll to resolve. So it's definitely kind of a neat system in the fact that you don't have limitations like one full action, one minor action, one bonus action, and one standard, or whatever the case may be. Instead, it's just penalties and you get to do as much as you want. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was inspiration. Inspiring is a DC 6, but if you lead by more, you can get +1 for allies for the scene, the resistances. Definitely a cool mechanic. And then there's terrifying, which is again a DC 6, which gives negatives to the enemies. So I actually had one player who was all about inspiring and one player who was all about terrifying. He was a melee mech with his axe and some gnarly barbs and stuff on him. Definitely really cool thing to have. Some neat stuff that's inside there is just about how the Remnants fight and things like that. Modifiers to stealth, all that stuff. It's very much inside the book for you to take advantage of. The one thing I will say is combat outside of mechs is incredibly deadly. Combat in mechs, when you first start off, very deadly. However, it is something that you can kind of get around. And what we fought was giant kaijus and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. Definitely really neat. To give you a quick rundown, let me talk about some of the characters that I had. I had Silas, which was a drone user, which the drones, if I remember right, come from the Broken Lands book, which is this second one here. This one is the core book right here, and if I remember right, I also got the fantasy version of this game, which I believe is called Edge Role-Playing. I could be saying that wrong because I'm just trying to recall off the top of my head. It's been a while since I even looked at that book, but it was like $10 on RPG Drive-Thru, so definitely check that out, DrivethruRPG. So definitely check that out. But Jeremy's character was Silas, who rode in Sub-Zero was his mecha, and he had assault drones, and he was specialized in awareness as far as a person goes. He also had, you have advantages and disadvantages. He had good luck and infamy, so like while he was a lucky character, he was also kind of sought after. Definitely kind of a fun thing. We had another character who had Ranjit, which was from the Desert Clans, and his mecha was more of like a strike mecha, assault mecha kind of balanced, and he was always brought up as a caravan guard. Then Neon was our leadership guy. That was Murdoch's character. He was from the Ice Tribes as well. And his character was more about speed and balance as far as the strike and assault went. The other thing that we added that wasn't originally in the game was your stats could never really improve. So what I did is instead we made a stat improvement category that basically states that when you get to so many stat improvements, which you got one per game, you could improve your stats, because at first it was really hard for them to gain levels. And then the other way that you gain experience towards a stat actually is to fail. So every time you fail a roll, you get 1 experience, and then when your experience matches up with your current level, you can level up. Easy enough. And then we had the Shadow Queen, which was Nina the blind character from the Vast region. She was a blind princess that found this mecha that could act as her eyes. It was a lot of fun. Her character was a little bit more towards the assault side. Tom, his character was Theron from the Desert Clan as well. And Theron's character actually ended up taking flight later on, which was definitely cool. And his character was another balanced character with a little bit more towards the armor side out of those ones. And then we had a couple other options inside here. And then I did little fun things like trackers about how successful they were on missions, what kind of things that they could track for their team. Eventually they ended up building an army, and we tracked that inside here. And I've got a spreadsheet full of this stuff. And we even included stuff like the Wall of Heroes and the Professional Robot Fighting, or Professional Pilots League, which was like a big competition to do mecha combat, because that was part of the fun draw to this system. With rules and entries and how the wins and losses played out in a gambling system behind it. It was a lot of fun, but it basically became kind of a knockoff of Gurren Lagann, because we had a weird oppressor, giant kaiju, and humanoid animal hybrids inside other fighting mechas, trying to torment and bring down the humans. Definitely a fun game to have. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek game of Remnants, but I could totally see a very serious game if you wanted to take advantage of it. There's by no means is designed to be a tongue-in-cheek game. We just kind of ran it that way. That is pretty much all that I have for Remnants. If you guys want to know more, again, ask me inside the comments. And as always, guys, I will see you at the gaming table.